Welcome to Mom Breaks. In this episode, we're talking with Megan, a mom of two from the northeast of England, about her experience with postpartum psychosis after the birth of her first baby. She navigated her first pregnancy amidst a global pandemic and had a long labor followed by an emergency procedure after her baby was born. Her psychosis had a steady incline over 8 weeks, and despite voicing concerns in the hospital after delivery and to care providers in the weeks following, she wasn't taken seriously until she was psychotic about 8 weeks postpartum. You'll hear about her time in a mother-baby unit and a general women's mental health hospital, and how these very different environments shaped her recovery. We also explore what systems of support look like in her area, from maternity leave to access to specialized care. And I may get on my soapbox for a minute to talk about how the US could do better when it comes to parental leave. Megan also wonders about how COVID impacted her journey, why religion surfaced in her delusions, and what it was like to approach pregnancy again after psychosis. Before we begin, a trigger warning. This episode includes discussion of suicide, delusional experiences involving many family members' deaths, and mentions of self-harm of other patients in a psych ward. Please listen with care and skip ahead if you need to.
So I'm Megan. I'm 34 and I live in the northeast of England. I live with my partner and two little boys. I've got Dylan, who's 4, and Oren, who is 7 months. So I'm currently on maternity leave at the moment, but my normal daytime job, I work in financial crime for like a local building society. So I kind of live where I grew up. I've got a lot of family around us. I don't like my family to be any more than 7 minutes away from me.
That's nice.
So I've got like a good support network, and kind of all my friends I've had since like secondary school.
Wow.
And they all live close by, and yeah, it's kind of me.
What does a typical day or week look like for you these days?
Well, my oldest one goes to nursery. So my first maternity leave, it was, well, obviously I was recovering from postpartum psychosis, but you kind of just did what the baby wanted to do, whereas my little baby now just has to fall in line with what we're doing. So nursery runs, library visits. I do like quite a lot of like baby classes and stuff. I'm quite a social person, so the more adult conversations I can have, the better for me. And I know getting out and about kind of helps. Yeah, just nursery visits, swimming lessons, and I like to do like a dance class as well.
What type of
It's just kind of like an R&B-ish kind of thing. So that's kind of where I have me time.
That's so nice. I'm glad that you create space for you to go to dance class.
And I think that is kind of one of the things that I kind of put me first at certain times as well, because I know that if I'm not well, then that's going to impact my immediate family and my extended family too. So I try and do things that make me feel good. Last Sunday, I just went to a comedy gig by myself. I've never done it before, but I was just like, I just need some me time. I actually went to a comedy gig in the Comedian. It was a work in progress show, but I've seen her before, and she actually did a show around postpartum psychosis.
Really?
A comedy show, yeah. And I didn't know. She was like supporting another act that I was seeing. And then she came and did a bit, and I was like, what? I was like, I didn't know. Yeah, so you just kind of don't expect that somebody could make it funny.
I'll link a clip of Kelly Ricard's Free as a Bird show where she talks about her psychosis in the show notes. A sneak peek.
And I didn't go mad in like a fun, charming way, you know, like posh people do. I didn't mince around the house.
She also looks like she has a Christmas special coming up. If anyone's in the UK, it looks like a fun set. I too wish I had gone mad in a fun and charming way. I love Megan's example of taking moments for herself, taking that dance class, going out to a comedy show, and enjoying some adult conversation or adult time. Those mom breaks matter. Next, we'll hear about some systems of support that Megan was able to utilize that are in her area in the UK, including some of the logistics of her paid parental leave.
Yeah, I've got a friend from America, and she gave birth in America and then had a second in England, and I kind of just didn't even think that you didn't have what we had. So for maternity leave, we get statutory pay, so the government pay a certain percentage of our wages for 6 weeks. I think it's 6 weeks, like nearly full pay. And then after that, it's like up to 9 months. It's not very much, but it is a little bit. But we can have up to a year off. Some of that'll be like unpaid. But my work give me 3 months full pay and then 3 months half pay. And then it goes down to statutory. And then I can put holidays in at the end and stuff. So when I had postpartum psychosis, I also was able to take like 6 months sick leave, which was full pay at the end. So although I felt I'd missed out on part of my maternity leave because I was ill, I felt a bit better because I then still got that recovery time after. So,
And that was through the government?
no, 6 months was through the company.
Okay.
The sickness pay at the end.
It's fantastic that Megan was able to take additional time off to recover after her experience with psychosis. I wanted to fold in a spotlight on a systematic review published back in 2023. It examines 45 different studies from around the world, all looking at how parental leave policies affect parental mental health. And findings are pretty conclusive for moms. When countries offer longer paid parental leave, mothers have fewer depressive symptoms and less psychological distress after birth overall. These policies give families some breathing room. For dads, it's a bit more mixed. And usually the benefit is when partners could take meaningful paid leave, but usually it was if they used it, that mattered. It's another reminder that the culture around these policies, not just the existence, shapes who actually gets to rest, recover, and bond with their baby. And these are associations, not causal links. These studies are concentrated in certain countries, and less common conditions like postpartum psychosis aren't specifically addressed in the bulk of this literature. So while these policies can lower the risk of depression, anxiety, it doesn't tell the whole story. And postpartum psychosis isn't fully understood as far as causes. Leave structure or leave policies are only part of the picture. Still, the presence or absence of support systems can influence how any parent navigates the postpartum journey, whatever that entails, from coping to recovery. One blip on the United States, the US is an outlier among wealthy nations in not guaranteeing some paid parental leave, even though there is research showing strong associations between paid leave and better health outcomes for parents and kids. If we care about parental mental health and systemically reducing risk, then we need to rethink how we structure family leave in the United States. So, with that in mind, let's turn to Megan's pregnancy and the year leading up to her experience with postpartum psychosis.
It was a global pandemic, so I found out I was pregnant 3 days before the Prime Minister announced that there was a lockdown. So the first person I told about my pregnancy had to be my manager at work, so I hadn't told my mum or anybody else. It was just me, my partner, and my manager from work who knew, because I was obviously more of a risk. So although, because it was my first pregnancy, I didn't know any different, but I spent the entire pregnancy kind of navigating isolation, and kind of having to weigh up what was worth leaving the house for. We managed to save loads of money because there was nothing to spend anything on. I was doing like hospital visits alone, scans alone. Looking back, it was a very anxious time for everybody, but I think that did play in, and I would be interested to know how many more cases of postpartum psychosis happened during the pandemic. Don't know whether they'll ever do any research around it, but I do think that played a massive part in it. Later on, it played into some of the delusions that I was having. And it made everything feel quite real because it did feel like the world was ending.
I too had wondered about COVID and postpartum psychosis trends and wanted to talk about a recent 2025 systematic review and meta-analysis, so it was released this year, examined the association of COVID-19 exposure and mental disorders. So a systematic review pools all papers on a topic, and a meta-analysis is the use of statistical methods to re-examine all of the data together. The meta-analysis approach helps detect smaller effects that single studies might miss and gives a broader picture of the evidence. In this case, they focused only on cohort studies, so work that follows a group of people over time, directly comparing those who had confirmed COVID infections to people who had not been infected, serving as a control group. Altogether, they analyzed 28 cohort studies representing nearly 1 billion people worldwide, which is quite an extraordinary data set. And the goal was to see whether people who had COVID were more likely to later be diagnosed with a mental health condition. They found a clear signal. Individuals with a history of COVID had about a 40% higher risk of developing a mental health disorder. That included anxiety and mood disorders, depression, bipolar, stress-related conditions, psychosis, and neurocognitive issues like memory or concentration problems. These individuals were also more likely to be prescribed psychiatric medications in the months following infection. So adding to that picture, there is some epidemiological work from Croatia that found that during the COVID-19 lockdowns, overall psychiatric hospitalizations actually declined, but emergency psychiatric visits and acute psychiatric admissions went up significantly. So there was a shift in how people were getting care, and suggests that mental health needs didn't disappear, but they were delayed or redirected, putting more pressure on crisis and emergency services. It's not new knowledge that viral outbreaks can be linked to psychosis. This connection was documented during the 1918 Spanish flu when doctors, including Carl Menninger, who was an influential American psychiatrist and a pioneer in the field of mental health, he described patients who developed severe mental symptoms like confusion, delusions, and agitation right after catching the flu. Researchers think this might happen for a couple of reasons. One is that some viruses can trigger widespread inflammation in the body, sometimes called a cytokine storm, where the immune system releases too many cytokines or molecules that coordinate inflammation. And the excessive inflammation can impact tissues and organs, including the brain. There is evidence pointing to the possibility that viral entry into brain structures can facilitate the onset of psychotic behavior in susceptible persons. So it's important to note that these studies illustrate an association, both through direct and indirect pathways. I don't want to be misunderstood that this would be, causal, likely it's a combination of genetic predisposition, and then infection could contribute to neuropsychiatric disruption. And then also the pandemic social and healthcare shifts, intensified stress, and reduced access to care. And personally, this feels highly relevant for me. I also experienced postpartum psychosis in the COVID era, 2021. And when I reviewed my hospital records, I noticed in my intake blood work, I think, I had coronavirus antibodies that were off the charts, highest amounts possible, likely from my second Pfizer shot that I had had a couple weeks prior. So leaves me wondering if I had had a really robust immune response that may have played a role in the development of my psychosis. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not saying that's what caused my experience. But there is some research that even back from 2009, there were some researchers that looked at recently admitted psychiatric patients and compared their blood work to healthy controls and saw how there were statistically significant differences in levels of coronavirus antibodies, where those with recent onset of psychosis had higher levels of antibodies. I digress. I'm mostly just surprised that this has not been any part of my discussions with my providers when there is some research here. Let's hear Megan remind us of silver linings of the COVID era and then her experience with mental health previously.
In England, there is still quite a lot of people that are still working from home. It works. So that was nice. I didn't have tiredness. I could have a nap on my break from lunch at work, which was nice. I was very excited to have my first baby. He was very much wanted and planned for. I'd been diagnosed with generalised anxiety and I'd had some counselling for it maybe 3 or 4 years before, which had really helped. I'd kind of knew how to control different things. I kind of knew that when I would have like big life changes, that could sometimes make my anxiety worse. And having a baby, I don't think there's anything bigger of a life change than that. So I was kind of aware that some things might still happen.
Absolutely. Yes, having a baby is huge. It's great that you had already learned to identify anxiety in yourself as well as had tools to deal with that. What did you know about mental health in your broader family?
My parents were always quite anxious. I did have an uncle who struggled with alcohol and he ended up taking his own life when I was 17.
Oh,
Um, and that kind of played into my delusions and hallucinations as well. Kind of, I'd never had, and none of my extended family had had sort of any major mental health crises. It wasn't anything really that we had any issues with, apart from the kind of generalised anxiety. I had actually known about postpartum psychosis because a friend of a friend had had it, but even when I got it, I didn't recognise it.
yeah. Well, it's talked about as so rare, it doesn't feel relevant to really absorb. It's one thing I try to be aware of, not talking about psychosis as rare. It's less common, but it can happen to anyone. I'm so sorry to hear about your uncle. Suicide's hard. I had a cousin take his own life, and for me, it played a role in my psychosis as well. So thanks for sharing. How would you describe your birth experience with your first?
I was exhausted and obviously quite anxious because I was on my own. I'd never had any sort of like dealings. I hadn't never been in hospital or anything like that. So I found it quite daunting. So I was induced, so I had to go into the hospital by myself. My mum waved us off with my case. And she's like, that was the hardest thing. And then my partner came and joined us once I was in established labour. It was long, and I don't know whether elements of the psychosis was coming in during that time and the exhaustion. Like time sort of just was a bit weird. And yeah, he came out, no complications, but I only had like gas and air. So I didn't have any other like pain stuff. But I had a retained placenta. So after baby out, yay. But they couldn't get my placenta out. So then I had to be rushed to theatre, and then I was given a spinal. So after all of kind of doing the birth naturally, they then had to give us a spinal. It's like a blocker thing. It's kind of what you would have in a epidural maybe. So then I couldn't like get up and stuff afterwards. And kind of that experience of being in operating theatre as well, I'd never experienced before. And then that sort of played into some of my hallucinations and thoughts and stuff, and why I was feeling the way that I was feeling afterwards. So my partner had to leave when I was on a labour ward, and I think the things that was happening had quite I was very self-aware of what was happening, and I could explain why I was doing some of the things that I was doing, which I think was why it took so long for us to be diagnosed. So the first kind of symptoms for me that I remember is like being on the ward and hearing a voice say, "Megan, I'm going to wrap you up and take care of you," something like that. And then I was hearing like a morning television show's theme tune being played on the corridor, and I think Fleetwood Mac was being played on the corridor, and it wasn't. And I remember I was writing notes excessively, like in my phone. In my head, I was doing it to kind of tell my partner like everything that he was missing out on with the baby, and like he'd had this nap and this feed. So I was trying to breastfeed at this point as well. And I remember I was just like exhausted. I hadn't had like any sleep. I think this is the only time that I would say that I would hear voices. I don't think I really heard voices again. Like, I think I had the thought of, I think you're going mad, but don't tell anyone, they'll think you're going mad. So just don't say anything to anybody. But then I still had my rational side of my brain that said, no, you need to tell someone. This isn't right. And I told a midwife, like, what was happening. When I've looked back on my notes, I think they kind of just put it as, I don't know whether they said that it was like an episode, but it felt like I needed to fight to get out of the hospital. And obviously it was COVID. There's like a massive risk. I just wanted to be out of hospital. There was 4 other women we all had curtains round us, so we couldn't see each other. So sometimes it's like, was that a voice, or was that just a patient next to us talking? And if I was trying to drift in and out of sleep, I was kind of explaining it that it was just a dream, or I was like explaining it all away, some of the things that was happening. But yeah, I got let out of hospital, and I was like, postpartum psychosis was never mentioned to us at that point. I don't actually think it ever was until I was actually sectioned. When I went home, I got I want to say like in the first 10 days, you get visits from like a community midwife who comes out and checks the baby and checks you. And also we have like health visitors. So I don't really know what their role is, but they're kind of more like development and like more social kind of side of things. So they were coming out. My health visitor was not great. she was calling me like different names, and which then fed into, am I actually Natalie? Like, but I remember as well going like, I'm not right and I'm gonna test her. And I kind of knew like the buzzwords to say to be like, I'm not okay. And nothing was ever like picked up.
Wow. You had in-home visits even? Sorry, was that weekly home visits?
In the first 10 days, I would have had like someone come out like nearly every day.
Wow, okay.
But there would just be times where I'd be fine and then I wouldn't be fine. Like my voice would change. Mum would be like, don't speak to us like that. And I was like, how? I really didn't. And it was like this voice was coming out that was not what was actually happening in my head. I just wasn't sleeping. I don't know what the period of time was, but I do remember one time they said, go up, have a nap. And I would just be like, what's the point? The baby's going to wake up. I'm going to have to feed him. And I just I couldn't relax. I couldn't sleep. And I think it might have been like 3 or 4 hours. I remember just being in my room by myself. I was just stretching. Felt like a long, long time. And I would hear the baby crying when he wasn't, and like see things. And I was just really, really messy. Like, but then I would be back to being normal. And then I would go. And so I kind of described some of the women that I've spoke to, kind of it came on quite quickly and escalated really quickly. Whereas I would call my psychosis kind of, it was more of a gradual curve up until it peaked. That went on for like a long time. Well, it was 8 weeks before I got any kind of, that I was sectioned.
Yeah, wow, 8 weeks. And you were having these like health visits and checkpoints along the way and still didn't get flags or anything?
I do remember a GP prescribing us antidepressants. I can't remember at what period of time this was, but that was when things like escalated. I don't know whether it was the medication or it was just my psychosis, but I remember like getting pains behind my eyes, and my mum actually took us back to her house because my partner like couldn't cope with me and a newborn baby. So yeah, it was a long time, and there was like excessive note taking. They would take notebooks away from us, and I'd find something to write on, and I'd have all these like weird theories. And the biggest themes of my delusions were, there was links to religion, which I know a lot of people do, which I don't really understand why, but I kind of had these theories that my family had been like sexually abused in the Catholic Church. I'm not religious myself, really, but kind of I was brought up in a Catholic school and did the Catholic Church thing, and grandparents, and I was kind of thinking about like ancestors and um yeah, loads of things like that. But I think with it being COVID, it felt really possible that everybody could die. And then this had had like an impact on everything. And I basically had to save all my family from dying and like committing suicide. So I thought my partner had died. I thought my brother had died. I thought my dad. And I was ringing my cousin, and I can't remember this, but she said that I'd said, I just wish Connor would stop hanging from my door. And that was just like a hallucination. But I thought that was real. I also was getting quite OCD symptoms as well. So I remember like I would pack a bag to go downstairs just in my house, and like I couldn't leave without certain things. And that felt very like anxious, like the anxiety around that was quite bad. The kind of peak for me that led us to be sectioned was that I thought my baby had died. And I was getting like screaming. I think I called 999. I was screaming for like my brother to do CPR on him. Um, Even as I started to get better, I still wasn't convinced that that hadn't happened. I had to keep getting reassurance, and I thought that he'd been like severely brain damaged because of it. And that took a long time for us to realise that that was part of the illness. But he would be in front of us and I'd be like, no, my baby's not here.
Just a sidebar. I want to know why the US felt the need to branch out from 999. Apparently, 919 was established in the 1930s in the UK, and it took the US 30 years to decide to establish an emergency line, but they decided to use 911 instead. We swayed Canada and Mexico to use 911 too, though, so at least North America is unified in crisis anyway. But now I know if I'm in other countries, 911 is not universal. On religion. Religion is neither purely protective nor harmful in the context of mental health. There's some work that shows that some of the community and other aspects can improve mental health. And then also there's other research that shows some negative impacts for mental health. For some, religion or spirituality helps with coping, and for others, religiosity can increase risk for positive psychotic symptoms. Positive psychotic symptoms, that's a phrase used in this body of research, often in schizophrenia research, where symptoms that give the patient augmented experiences that other people do not have. So delusions, grandiose thinking, hallucinations, these are called positive psychotic symptoms. And I'll link a study that talks about religiosity and an increased risk for positive psychotic symptoms. In one analysis of a World Health Organization mental health survey, this was conducted in 18 countries with over 25,000 adults. They found that among participants who identified with a religion, which was about 85% of the survey population, higher levels of religiosity were generally linked to a greater likelihood of experiencing psychotic experiences. Specifically, 4 out of 5 measures of religiosity showed a connection, and those were considering religion important during your childhood, seeing religion as very important in daily life, frequently turning to religion for comfort, or often using religious beliefs to guide everyday decisions. It's an interesting study. I will link it. It doesn't really talk about why, but one wondering I have is, from my religious training, I was trained to look for meaning in everyday details, and that I did have a calling in this life, and that spiritual experiences could come at any time. Perhaps those spiritual practices lend themselves well to a full psychotic experience. Now we'll hear about how Megan and her spouse sought help through a family friend.
Rang a family friend who said, like, she needs like help, like you need to contact the GP. And I think the GP spoke to us, and I was just screaming at this GP. And like, I think I was swearing at her. I'm really not that type of person. I'm not aggressive. I'm not violent. But I was like screaming. And that was, I remember like screaming in my dad's ear, and I was just scared. So I think the GP then contacted, we have a crisis team in the UK, and 2 people came to my house. Well, I was at my mum's at this point with masks on because it was COVID. And so I didn't really know who these people were anyway. And I definitely didn't know them with masks on. They kind of went away, and then I want to say about 7 people turned up to my mum's house. And this was in COVID when nobody could go in to anywhere. And there was 7 different cars parked outside my mum's house because they all had to come separately. So I think with those, there was like social workers, doctors, psychiatrists. I think they made the assessment that I should be sectioned. I wanted to leave there and then, but I had to wait for an ambulance. So it took a while because they had to find a bed for me and Dylan. So my family kind of thought, all right, Megan's going to go to hospital, that's fine. But they didn't realise that, no, they were going to get me and Dylan a bed at a mother and baby unit. So there was a lot of like to and fro and trying to get beds and like staff available at those hospitals to be able to look after us. And there was potential that I could have just gone to like a general mental health hospital. But yeah, I was lucky enough to get a space at a mother and baby unit, which was an hour away. When I got in the ambulance, I actually, because it was kind of like just a blacked out car, like what famous people would go in. And I thought that it was actually like a hearse, that I was actually a dead body being taken away in a private ambulance, because that's what it looked like. And I was with Dylan, the baby. I still thought he was dead. I didn't really understand. That then fed in, well, I must be dead as well. There was people in that ambulance with us. And then I got took there. The mother and baby unit I was at had 6 beds, but it was, I don't know whether there was lots of people in there. But when I arrived, I thought that I'd been like in a care home, like that I'd gone to an old people's home. So it had like a double bed, a desk, and it was really nice. Like kind of, it didn't feel like a hospital. It felt more like well, it still felt odd, but had like an ensuite bathroom. Not that I was really aware of it. I think I just kind of sat on the bed. And yeah. So my whole stay was about 3 months. So I was sectioned on the 11th of January. And I wasn't making like any progress. Now I have requested my hospital notes, which I'm still working my way through them. But they tried us on an antipsychotic called haloperidol, which didn't work for us, but I also was trying to hide the medication. So we don't actually know whether I was fully taking it or if I was hiding it, because I would get anxious. There'd be certain staff that would give us the medication and I'd not trust them and try and secrete it. So I don't know how much I was actually taking, but I didn't get better. My family took Dylan the baby away at a certain point because I wasn't caring for him. Like they had him in a nursery, and I would go in and the door would beep. So it had like air conditioning in this room to keep it at a reasonable temperature. But I thought it was a place where they keep like dead bodies for babies, and that they were just showing me Dylan's dead body. And they were like, she's not, would you be happy to look after Dylan at home? So I don't know for how many, he might have gone home for a week. So every movement that I would make, another person that I knew, like friend or family, had died. They'd hung themselves. I could hear it. I could see it. I was running up to doors and trying to get into doors. There was other patients there and babies I was trying to save. I didn't know that I was trying to save them as if they were my family or friends. So I would like run up to the doors. I threw cups at other patients, which I bumped into another patient like a year after, and I had no recollection of doing this. And she was like, "You know, you threw a cup at us." I was like, "I'm sorry, I have no recollection of that." So I was quite a danger to like other like staff and ended up pulling curtains down. I think I rang the fire brigade. I was trying to get out of windows, posting books through windows, literally crazy things, to the point I attacked one of the nurses. And at that point, they basically got me a bed at a general, like, women's mental health hospital. Dylan wasn't with us at that point, which was about an hour and a half away from that hospital. So I went there and spent my 30th birthday there by myself on the women's mental health ward.
Yeah.
So when I was in the mother and baby unit, I was on like 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 observations, like nearly all the time. But then when I went down to the general one, I wasn't on, like, I think I was on hourly observations, but I don't know whether the medication had started working. So I attacked the nurse on the night time, and I was in this other hospital by like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know whether I'd come round or the medication was sort of starting to take an effect. But being on this mental health ward, it was what I expected of a mental health ward. So I was like, oh, I am mentally ill. This is what it is. It was very like a jail, and the other women that were there were very obviously mentally ill. So I had, like, there was women who had, like, had obviously like cut their throats, and it was very visual that I am in a mental health ward, whereas on the mother and baby unit I kind of didn't get it. But they started to change my medication. And when I got there, they put us on a antipsychotic called quetiapine. And they put us on like 800 milligrams of it, which, when I've read back on my hospital notes, is like a ridiculously high dosage that they wouldn't normally prescribe. And when they sort of transferred us over, they're like, why is this doctor giving us such a high dosage? But it did help. Yeah, it did help in the end, but I was on that high dosage for like a very long time. Nearly like 2 years. But yeah, so I was there a week, and then I kind of was getting a bit more aware of what was happening. And then the mother and baby unit, my family came down with my baby, and I had to have like a Zoom call to check that how I was, and like that I could care for him. And then they said they would have us back. So then I went back up, and that was kind of the start of us getting better.
All right, so Megan went back to the mother baby unit after her short stay in a general women's mental health hospital. From there, she improved. She was able to care for her son again and keep improving until she was discharged. She mentioned spending her 30th birthday in that general mental health hospital. And that, my heart sank a little. I understand what it's like to have time blur in a hospital, and milestones that should feel joyful instead feel surreal. And hearing how that experience, as hard as it was, helped her realize she was sick, that it pushed her to want to get better, that sticks with me. I've imagined my own story might have been different had I been treated in a mother-baby unit, and maybe it would have been. It would have been. Yeah, hearing Megan describe this made me wonder if sometimes that stark, unfamiliar setting of a psych ward can also become a turning point, a kind of motivation to get well. I'm mulling over that. Let's hear what that whole experience meant for Megan and her family.
It was the worst thing that could ever happen. Obviously, I haven't lived my whole life, and I will go through bereavement of different family and friends, but to feel like everybody that I've known had died and that was really real, I'll never go through that again. It's the worst thing that ever happened to us, so nothing worse can happen. I've gone through that, so I can go through anything. I've gone on to have another baby. A second baby was always on the cards, and I didn't want postpartum psychosis to take that away from me. I think it was harder for my family because they saw it happen to me and were like, I'm scared that that's going to happen again. I don't want you to have to deal with that again. But I was very adamant. I had really good care. So I was under the services of perinatal team, I had a preconception appointment. So they went over my options for medication and the care that I would have after birth. And during I'm still under the care of perinatal at the moment. So I kind of get monthly visits now, but I'm off all medication now. So I chose to take preventative medication straight after birth so that I wouldn't get it again. And that really helped with sleep. And for the first 6 weeks, my partner took all the night feeds. And it just kind of stopped that anxiety. Because quetiapine worked for me the last time, I just had a smaller dosage. So I think I took 50 milligrams the first day and then quickly increased it up until 200. And then they would assess us, see if there was any sort of signs of psychosis coming through. And then they would alter it if they needed to, but I wasn't showing any signs. So I stayed on that for a couple of months and then was weaned back down off it. I understand both ways why someone would want to have a baby and who wouldn't. I have a very big support network. I also had to take into consideration the impact that it would have on my older child. Would I be able to cope with being away from him for such a long period of time? But also, I've survived that, and you know what's coming. A lot of people don't know what postpartum psychosis is. Once you've experienced it, you know what it is. Your family, your friends know what the signs are. I would have got the help much quicker than I did first time round, where it was a total unknown. And I think personally, I don't regret it. And I'm glad that I did because I didn't get it again. And I think even if I did get it again, it wouldn't have been as severe. And I would have got the support and the help, medically and through my family, much quicker this time.
Let's talk about what it means to consider another pregnancy after experiencing postpartum psychosis. Megan illustrates really good proactivity in approaching her subsequent pregnancy. I wanted to share a couple stats. There are different studies on this, of course. One study I'll link shows that many women go on to have healthy pregnancies and recoveries. About 44% of women who experience postpartum psychosis have what's called an isolated episode, meaning they experience postpartum psychosis after one baby and then never again. For those who do have another baby, there's a mix of estimates. Some say the risk, it falls somewhere between 30 and 50%, depending on the study you look at. And depending on factors like mental health history, family support, access to preventative care. The risk tends to be higher for those who live with a bipolar disorder diagnosis, but with good planning, monitoring, and support, women are able to navigate pregnancy safely. The key is working with a solid care team from conception through pregnancy and delivery with a proactive plan, medication where appropriate, and having a really good postpartum plan. I love the approach that Megan and her partner took of giving 6 weeks of good sleep to mama after baby was there, to help ensure there was no relapse. These steps can make an enormous difference and transform what could feel like fear into confidence and preparedness. Let's hear Megan's reflections on the long-term recovery process.
I think it's long, so it's nearly like 5 years since I was sectioned, and I only came off medication like a year or so ago. I think it'll always change. Yeah, I just have a different sort of outlook on life. I don't get stressed about things that I used to get stressed or anxious about. But I think I did have like a bit of depression after. I think the aim for me was to get out of the mother and baby unit. And once that happened, it was like, well, what now? And it was kind of just sort of drip feeding bits of my life back together and the social side of things. It took a while, and like people would say, oh, that's Megan being back to herself. That's a little bit of like what we know. My aim was always like, if I'm out, I'll always be like, I want to dance on the tables. Once I'm dancing on the tables, that's when I know I'm better. And I did that sober like quite early on. But yeah, it takes a while. So after I was discharged from the perinatal team, I got put into a team called the early psychosis team. And there I did some EMDR therapy. I don't know how much it helped, and I would like to do it now, not on medication. I think making time for myself and just making sure that I'm like calm on and not being overwhelmed by things, not doing too much. It kind of feels a bit like I've got an excuse. I know like how bad it can be, and so I'm gonna take that time out for me and not feel guilty about it. I feel quite even now. So I've recently came off the medication and I can feel things more now. I'll cry at sad films that before I just couldn't do anything. Like if my child hit themselves, I wouldn't have any reaction. So I was just kind of numb.
Hearing Megan talk about feeling more broadly again, about being able to cry at sad films or react when her child gets hurt, resonates. That numbness she felt before wasn't indifference. It was part of a healing process, a side effect of the medication that helped her get stable again. Now, in this place of balance and clarity, she's able to look back and see how far she's come. In my own experience, just after my hospitalization, I think I was in survival mode. I remember not singing to my baby like I had been and noticing I didn't feel like singing. Recovering from such an intense and vulnerable experience takes time. So when I asked Megan what advice she'd give to other survivors of postpartum psychosis, she had this to say.
You will get better. It is the most treatable mental health illness that you can get. It feels like your world's ending, but it's not. And there is going to be some good stuff that's going to come from it. Not only you having a child, but there will be some good stuff again.
Yes, there will. I love that advice. Thank you to Megan for sharing her story so openly from her experience with postpartum psychosis, the onset of her symptoms, the flavor of her delusions, as well as other symptoms, and to how she approached her second pregnancy and everything she learned along the way. Super helpful to hear and learn from her. I particularly loved the perspective from another country. I loved hearing how parental leave is structured, the availability of mother-baby units, as well as this approach with community, both crisis teams as well as community check-ins that are a default after birth to help families feel supported. Just a reminder that we can learn from each other globally. Before we wrap, I have to laugh. This episode, I am Meg. Megan has been sharing her story with postpartum psychosis, and apparently her midwife was named Megan too. So it's a bit of a Megan multiverse. If you got a little confused at any point, totally fair. I hope today's conversation leaves you reflecting on how support, care, and self-compassion can make a difference, and is a solid reminder to take your breaks however you need them. If that's dancing on tables, you find the time, make it happen. You deserve it. Thank you for listening to Mom Breaks.